Hi guys, good morning. Mrs. Eisenbrown here, and I have a book called Mr. Crumb's Secret by Phyllis J. Perry. And this is a Fribble Mouse Library mystery. So we're going to start reading Mr. Crumb's Secret. And on the cover there's a mouse. This is Mr. Crumb, and this is Fribble. I know that because I read a little bit of the book already. And there's something to do with a library, which is why I chose to read this one. So let's see what happens in this story. It was written by Phyllis J. Perry and illustrated by Ron Lipking. It's an upstart book published in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Dedicated to Casey, Claire, Julia, and Emily. I don't know who they are, but this book was dedicated to them, and it was copyright 2003. So you can decide to figure out how old this book is if you want to. Chapter 1. Fribble Mouse was a small gray mouse who lived in Cheddarville, Wisconsin. Two things really stood out about Fribble. He had an extraordinarily long tail, and he was extremely curious. Fribble loved football and baseball. He was very good at science and math, although not too quick at reading in his second grade class at Twitch Elementary School. He adored eating fresh green peas, sesame crackers, sunflower seeds, and Gouda cheese. He liked visiting the zoo and the park, but most of all, he loved a mystery. Directly across the street from Fribble lived a friendly mouse named Mr. Crumb. Mr. Crumb lived alone and spent a lot of time working in his beautiful garden. Sometimes Fribble went over and helped. Curious Fribble always had a million questions to ask. How? When? Where? What? Why? And Mr. Crumb patiently answered all of them. He even explained why grass is green, which is a very tough question, and he never seemed to grow tired of his little neighbor. When Mr. Crumb lost his trowel or couldn't find the nozzle for his hose, Fribble stopped asking questions and moved into action. He had an uncanny ability to find missing objects. One Thursday afternoon in September, Fribble went over to Mr. Crumb's right after he got home from school. He helped Mr. Crumb in the garden, and then they sat on the porch, nibbling cheese and drinking lemonade. Fribble stroked his whiskers, lounged back in his chair, and gave a little squeak of contentment. Then he said, "Don't you ever get tired of working so hard in the garden, Mr. Crumb?" "Funny thing you should ask that," Mr. Crumb said. "As a matter of fact, I never get tired of my garden, and I miss working in it during the winter time, so I'm really thinking of taking up a new hobby, something I can do when the snow falls and the garden is resting." "A new hobby?" Fribble said. He quickly swallowed the bit of cheese he had in his mouth and sat up straight and alert in his chair. His nose wrinkled up and down, making his whiskers wiggle the way they always did when his curiosity kicked into high gear. "What's your new hobby gonna be?" Mr. Crumb smiled. "It's a secret," he whispered. "A secret?" Fribble repeated, lowering his voice to a whisper too, as he softly said one of his favorite words. He put down his frosty glass of lemonade and turned all his attention on Mr. Crumb. "But what is it?" Mr. Crumb laughed. "If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret anymore, would it? Fact is," he continued, "I'm going to learn to do something. At least I hope I am. I'm sure going to try very hard. You go off to school every day now that summer vacation's over, and you learn things all the time. But it's been a long time since I've studied and learned something new. So I'm going to keep my new hobby a secret until I learn how to do it. Then I'll tell you all about it." Fribble thought fast. "Maybe," he said, "if you told me about it, I could help you learn. I'm pretty good at addition and subtraction. I can read short, easy books, and I know an awful lot about caterpillars and butterflies. I'll remember that, Mr. Crumb said, but I think I have to learn about my new hobby all by myself. Then I'll show you, he promised. Or, he said, and Fribble noticed the twinkle in his eye, maybe since you're good at mysteries, you can discover my secret all by yourself. I challenge you to try. Fribble gave a shudder of eager anticipation. A challenge? Since he couldn't coax this out of Mr. Crumb, he figured it all out by himself. He would figure it out all by himself. He finally left to go home for dinner, but he promised himself that he would keep his eyes and ears open. He was sure he could discover the secret before Mr. Crumb told him. Late Friday afternoon, Fribble was playing catch with his little brother Scamper in his front yard when the mail truck came. Instead of just putting letters in the mailbox, the mailman carefully took a parcel out of his truck and carried it right up to Mr. Crumb's door and rang the bell. Smack! The football that Scamper threw hit Fribble right in the stomach, because he wasn't watching. His eyes weren't on the ball. They were on the long, thin parcel that the mailman handed over to Mr. Crumb. Could this have something to do with the secret? And there's a picture here. I think you can see that if you look. See the mailman with the postage package right there? That must be Mr. Fribble. Okay. Hold on, I gotta push a button. Okay. That night, just before he fell asleep, Fribble thought about the package again. What could be in it? What was long and thin? Golf clubs? Skis? A pogo stick? Tent poles? The bow for a violin? What was Mr. Crumb's secret hobby? The question was still in Fribble's mind when he went down to breakfast the next morning. After breakfast, Fribble's mother reminded him, "Don't forget it's trash day. Be sure you take the trash can out to the curb first thing." "I will," Fribble said. He went out into the garage and wheeled the garbage can right out to the curb. Then he noticed that Mr. Crumb had already put his trash out. The lid wasn't on his can the way it usually was because of a discarded, long, thin box sticking way up out of the can. Fribble's nose began to twitch. He looked to the right and he looked to the left. No one was in sight. Quickly, Fribble ran from his trash can right over to Mr. Crumb's. He stared at the box. It had a bright sticker on it, but Fribble couldn't read the words. Again, he looked to the left and to the right. Then he jumped right up onto the trash, and using his teeth, he tore off the part of the package containing the label. Holding it tightly in his paw, Fribble darted back across the street and took the label up to his room. He smoothed it out on the floor and tried to read the 3 words. The door opened and little Scamper came in. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Reading," Fribble said. "Well, reading what?" "Reading this label, of course." "Well, what's it say?" asked Scamper. "I'm not sure," Fribble admitted. "These words are hard." "Ask Mom," Scamper suggested. Fribble thought for a moment. If he asked his mother, would that be cheating? Mr. Crumb had challenged him to figure out the secret by himself. It wasn't really fair to ask her. "I'm going to figure it out for myself," Fribble said, "and I don't want to wait until Monday to go to the school library. I'm going to go to the public library this morning." "Can I come?" asked Scamper. "Sure," Fribble agreed, "if you can remember how to act in a library," he added. Scamper looked serious. "No running and yelling," he said, "and handle the books carefully with clean paws," he added. "You got it," Fribble said. He folded up the label from the box and shoved it into his pocket. He and Scamper went downstairs to find their mother. "Is it okay if we go to the library this morning?" Fribble asked. "Of course," his mother agreed, "but be back before lunchtime." Fribble and Scamper walked down the street. The library was only a few blocks away, and they had often gone there during the summer for story hour. They both knew the librarian, Miss Scurry. They walked up the old stone steps and right up to the desk where Miss Scurry sat. "May I help you?" she asked. Fribble took the label out of his pocket and spread it out on the counter. "I want to look up these words," he said. "I want to know what this means." "You need a good dictionary," Miss Scurry said. She took Scamper and Fribble over to a table in a reference area and brought a big dictionary to them. "Do you know how to use this?" she asked. "Well, I've looked up some words in the dictionary at school," Fribble said, "but it took me an awful long time to find them." "Guide words will help," Miss Scurry said. "Let me show you. Your first word is Fragile. You start out by looking in the dictionary at the words that start with the letter F." Miss Scurry helped the boys look up both words, learn how to pronounce them, and understand their meanings. But when she was finished, Fribble was discouraged. He knew how to read the two words now, fragile and antenna, and he knew what they meant, but he still didn't know what Mr. Crumb's secret was. Could it be a very delicate insect?
I'm on it.
And that's the end of chapter 1.